Hello everyone. So now we'll be discussing about your minor connectors. This minor connector will become your connecting link just after your major connector, or that can be defined. This major connector, if you have to define it, then I can call it as the connecting link between the major connector and the other parts of the RPD such as you have your clasp or direct retainer, you have your occlusal rest, you have indirect retainer, you have your denture base, etc. Right? So this minor connector, what does major connector do? It connects the part on one side to the other side, right? Unification, what we have discussed. But minor connector, what it does is, it connects all the other parts of your RPD to the major connector, right? It joins everything else to the major connector. That is what is called as a minor connector, right? Now, so it connects your clasp, direct retainer, indirect retainer, occlusal rest, denture base, whatever. Any part of the RPD is connected to the major connector by minor connector. So what are its function? Number one, it will have a prosthesis to abutment stress distribution. Prosthesis to abutment stress distribution. That is, whatever occlusal force is falling on your prosthesis, the artificial teeth that you're placing on RPD, it has to be transferred to the abutment teeth as well as the underlying alveolar ridge. That is carried out by your minor connector. Second, transferring of stress again from the prosthesis to the tissue as discussed. Third part, it provides horizontal stability. Important. It provides horizontal stability, an important part. And number four, horizontal stability, how? I'll tell you. Number four, it also is responsible for acting as a guide plate. Right? So this third and fourth point has to be explained. So just imagine you have a RPD like this, right? This is an abutment tooth. An abutment tooth like this. This is your gingiva and the edentulous ridge like this. So let's say you fabricated an RPD here, right? You fabricated an RPD. This is your artificial teeth and all that. And let's say this is your major connector going like this. This one, your minor connector, it connects this artificial teeth to the abutment tooth and to the major connector. Right? It connects this artificial teeth to the abutment as well as to the major connector. Now, since it is going like this minor connector, how it should run is, it should always run perpendicular. It should always run perpendicular to the major connector. If this is the major connector, this minor connector should arise perpendicularly from it. And in this picture, it is your occlusal rest, which is getting connected to a major connector. So this, what I've drawn in black, is your minor connector. Right. So this minor connector, just imagine, it is running parallel, perpendicular to the major connector and contacting the abutment tooth like this. It is exerting a horizontal force, or it is horizontally resting against the abutment teeth, right, in this direction. So it will help the RPD withstand the horizontal reflections. It acts as top against the abutment tooth, right? If this is the abutment, it presses like this. So further horizontal displacement can be avoided. That is why it provides horizontal stability. Number one, it provides horizontal stability to the RPD. Number four, I told you, it acts as a guide plane. Right. So what are guiding planes? Guiding plane and guide plate. Both are different. Guide plane is in the patient's mouth. Guide plate will be in the RPD. The opposite component. Right. For example, let's say you have a patient whose abutment molar is tipped like this, tilted like this. Right, this is edentulous. So your RPD cannot be inserted like this. There is a limitation, right? The patient can open the mouth only so much. You cannot open wide and insert the RPD like this. There is a limit. So what you do is, before in the diagnosis, after the diagnosis, before taking the impression, you do something called as a mouth preparation. You do something called as a mouth preparation, in which you prepare your occlusal rest, you prepare your guiding planes, you prepare any undercuts. If there are no undercuts for retention, you create undercuts, you place any crowns if necessary. All that comes under your mouth preparation, right? So in this mouth preparation, we have to decide something called as the path of insertion. We have to decide this path of insertion. It means how do you insert the RPD? For that, what you do is, you do enameloplasty and you create flat surfaces. You do enameloplasty over here and you create a flat surface of this tilted tooth so that the RPD can have a path of insertion like this. RPD can be inserted like this. That is what is called as mouth preparation, in which you are preparing something called as a guide plane or a guiding plane. So guiding plane refers to this flat surface that you have prepared in the patient's mouth, which is determining the path of insertion. Again, if I have to demonstrate, one crown is like this, right? Another crown, the next premolar is like this, and this part is edentulous, right? So as per this tooth, you have to insert like this. As per this tooth, you have to insert like this, which is not possible clinically. So you have to come in between. You have to make the teeth surfaces parallel like this, right? This is what is called as your mouth preparation stage. And this parallel surfaces what are prepared is what is called as the guiding or guide planes. So guide planes are always in the patient's mouth, and the corresponding part in your RPD, it is called as the guide plates. It is called as the guide plates. So guide plane and guide plates determine the path of insertion. And the part of the RPD I told you, which is touching the abutment tooth like this, which is going and touching against this prepared surface like this. Just imagine, right? This is going and touching like this, providing a rest. This part is your minor connector, right? It is connecting the major connector with your occlusal rest in the abutment. So it is a minor connector which is acting as a guiding plate in your RPD, right? So those are the functions of your minor connector. Horizontal stability and guiding plate are very important. Now, this minor connector I told you, it can be of many types, right? It can be of many types. That is, the minor connector can be the one which joins the clasp assembly, to the major connector. Second, it joins the indirect retainer or your auxiliary rest that we'll be studying to the major connector. Number 3, it joins the denture base to the major connector. And number 4, it forms the approach arm. It forms the approach arm for your gingivally approaching clasp. Right? All these we'll study when we study the corresponding components, right? This joins the clasp assembly. We'll be studying about clasp assembly. It joins the indirect retainer. We'll be studying about this. Gingivally approaching clasp. We'll be studying about this, right? So it will be discussed when we study the respective topics. Now just focus upon the minor connector, which joins the denture base to the major connector, right? Again, whatever component which is joining anything to the major connector is called as minor connector. So this joins the denture base to the major connector, this type of minor connector that we'll be discussing now, right? And one thing I want you to know is that minor connector which has been discussed, which has been mentioned last, which forms the approach arm for your gingivally approaching clasp, this can be, or this might be, non-rigid. This might be non-rigid. Because whenever I spoke about major connector, whenever I spoke about all the parts of the RPD, I told you they have to be rigid. Only then there will be a good force transmission. But this type of minor connector, which forms the vertically approaching arm of your gingival clasp, right? It can be non-rigid or flexible or slightly flexible. There are only 2 or 3 things in RPD where flexibility is allowed, and this is one of them, right? Now, that minor connector which joins the denture base to the major connector, which joins the denture base to the major connector, it can again be of 3 types. Right? Denture base means you know it, right? The artificial teeth that we are placing. We have an acrylic base for that, and this has to be joined to the major connector. And that is by means of minor connector. Right. So there are 3 types for that. Number 1 is your lattice work type, also called as loop and ladder. Number 2 will be your mesh type. Number 3 will be bead, wire or nail head type. Bead, wire or nail head type. So your RPD, whatever you're doing, whatever you've done in your 3rd year, final year internship, all these are your gum strippers. You're just purely made up of acrylic. But your actual RPD, your cast partial denture, comprises of a metal framework, right? It comprises of a metal framework which is joined to the acrylic. So you have metal which is connected to the acrylic, and the connection you call it as the minor connector. Okay. So coming to the first type, the lattice work or the loop and ladder type, the loop ladder type of minor connector. In this, you have the minor connector like this. You have a metal which is having large holes, like this. This is what is, these are your holes, right? Whatever I have given here, these are your holes. So in this lattice work or loop ladder type, you have large holes through which the acrylic will flow, through which the acrylic can flow and interlock. Large holes in the metal through which the acrylic can flow and interlock itself, you call it as loop and ladder or lattice work type. And this offers the best connection or best locking with the acrylic. Among the 3 types, this loop ladder or lattice work type offers the best joining of the metal and the acrylic because the holes are large. Acrylic can easily go and interlock itself during acrylization. And at the distalmost extent, what you can see, this will be mesial and this will be the distal side. You can see a small projection. This is nothing but a tissue stop. Right? It prevents any further pressure when you are processing or acrylization. It prevents distortion during your acrylization or packing. Alright. Now coming to your advantages or features of your first type, lattice work type. Number 1, I told you it provides the strongest attachment to your acrylic. Number 2, it is very easy to reline. In case of ridge resorption. See, irrespective of how well your RPD is there, over 5-10 years, your alveolar ridge will resorb when there is no teeth. So your RPD becomes slightly loose. So it has to be relined, just like complete dentures. It has to be relined regularly, as and when required. So this type of meshwork, if you're having the loop ladder type, it is very easy to reline, or relining is possible very easily. Okay. And lastly, it is mainly indicated in your distal extension cases. Kennedy's class 1 or class 2 types, distal extension cases. This lattice work or loop ladder type. Now, coming to the second type, it is called as meshwork type. What is a mesh? Something like a net. So in your meshwork, you have something like a net like this, right? Like a filter, you can imagine, like this. So this again is made up of metal like a mesh, and its holes are smaller. its holes are smaller compared to the first type, the lattice work or the loop ladder. So if the holes are smaller, your acrylic can flow, but it will be difficult. The acrylic can flow with difficulty. In your loop ladder type, the holes were very large. Acrylic could easily flow inside and lock itself. Here, yes, acrylic can flow through, but it is difficult. So it is not as strong as the lattice type. Not as strong as the lattice type. Strong as in the connection between the acrylic and the metal. That connection is weaker than the lattice type, but stronger than the third type, than the nail bed type. The connection of the metal and the acrylic. And here also, relining is possible. Relining is possible, but difficult. Because the holes are very small. Now, third one, last point is, since the holes are very small, during acrylization, you have to apply more pressure. Only then the acrylic will easily flow through it. The third type of the minor connector is your nail head type, also called as bead wire. Nail head or bead wire type. This is completely solid, completely made up of solid metal. There are no holes. There are no holes. That is, you can imagine a complete solid metal, with no holes. Then how does it lock itself to the acrylic? The interlocking is by means of any vertical projections like nails which are present. Right? By means of any vertical projections like nail-like projections upon which the acrylic will go and interlock. Right? So compare your lattice type, very strong connection, large holes. The meshwork type, small holes, but still the acrylic is going inside and flowing inside and locking itself. In your this thing, the acrylic cannot flow inside. It is only by mechanical interlocking by these nails. So naturally, the attachment becomes weak. The connection of the acrylic and the metal becomes very, very, very weak. So it is not indicated in your distal extension. It is mainly used in your class 3. Class 3 is tooth supported. You do not need much of strength. Right? You have good tooth support. Mainly the support is provided by the anterior and posterior abutment teeth. Second feature is that it cannot be relined. First type, loop and ladder type, it was very easy to reline. Second type, meshwork, relining was possible but difficult. Whereas in this nail head type, relining is impossible. You cannot reline it. If the ridge resorption is more, you have to remake an RPD. Right? It cannot be relined because it is solid. It is made up of a solid metal. And lastly, where it is used in case of reduced inter-ridge space. Reduced inter-ridge space. Because it is solid, it does not, acrylic do not have to flow inside and lock it. You can use it in reduced inter-ridge space. It is thinner. Alright. So these were the 3 different types of your minor connector which joins the denture base to the major connector. Its features and all that. All the other types of minor connector, we'll be discussing it as and when we study your different parts of the RPD. Right. Now, one question has come from this minor connector is that this shape of the minor connector should be dash. Just imagine this is your abutment tooth like this. I'll just draw only the crown. Just imagine these are your abutment teeth like this. Your minor connector, let's say this is edentulous, this span. It has to go between the teeth and give an occlusal rest. Just imagine, type of an embrasure clasp. So always your minor connector, this part, this is the minor connector, whereas this is the major connector. Right. So minor connector, it is going parallel to the long axis of the tooth and exerting a horizontal pressure. So it should be as inconspicuous as possible. By which I mean, when the patient is smiling, you should not see the minor connector. It is present between the crown. So when the patient smiles, just imagine you're seeing this metal. It is not aesthetic. So it should be as inconspicuous as possible. So it should go and lodge in the embrasure space. It should go and lodge itself within the embrasure space between the teeth. So it should have a triangular surface like this. Right? Just imagine this one, I'm drawing it here. It should have a triangular surface so that it can go and tightly fit into the interproximal space. So the shape of this minor connector is triangular. Majorly, it will be triangular shaped, a previously asked question. Alright, so with this, we have come to the end of your minor connector discussion.